I worked graveyard shift at an Appalachian gas station. The same truck stopped every rainstorm. I still wake up when it rains. Not every time, hard rain. The kind that comes in with thunder, where the first real crack of it goes off somewhere and the house lights dip for half a second before they catch again. I'll be asleep, and then I'm not. And I'm lying there with my eyes already open and my heart going like I've got somewhere to be. My wife sleeps right through it. She can sleep through anything. I've timed myself, which I know is a strange thing to admit, but I've timed it, and I'm awake before the thunder. A few seconds before. Every time. I've had about 11 years to make my peace with how that sounds, and I haven't, so I'm just going to tell you the rest of it and let you do what you want with it. I worked nights at a gas station for a little under 2 years. This was southern Ohio, right down on the river, on the stretch of Route 52 between Portsmouth and Ironton, where there's not a whole lot but the road, the water, and the hills coming down close on the far bank. If you've driven it, you know the kind of dark I mean. It's not country dark. Country dark has stars in it. This was river dark, low and wet, the hills holding it down over the road like a hand. I want to be honest that for most of those 2 years, nothing happened. That's important, and I think it's the part people get wrong when they tell stories like this. They make it sound like it was every night, like the air was thick the whole time. It wasn't. Most of my shifts, I did the crossword on the back of a free real estate magazine and listened to a call-in show out of Huntington and watched the clock not move. I want you to understand that, because the thing I'm going to tell you only worked because of how boring the rest of it was. It needed the boredom. It hid inside it. I took the job because I needed a job, and it was the only place hiring nights, which is a sentence I could put on my headstone. I was 22. I'd done 3 semesters at the community college up in Portsmouth, and then I just sort of stopped. The way you stop, no big decision. You just one day don't go back. I was living with my mom out toward Wheelersburg, and she wasn't on me about much, but she was on me about that. So when the sign went up in the window of the station, I drove down and asked, and the owner hired me about 40 seconds into the conversation. His name was Denny. He owned the place outright, had bought it back in the 80s when a station on 52 still meant something, before the bypass and the cards at the pump and all of it. By the time I worked for him, it was mostly dying, slow and quiet, the way a lot of things down there were dying. He didn't say that, but you could feel it in how he priced the coffee. The store was small. 2 aisles of the stuff you'd expect: chips, motor oil, the medicine that's mostly there so people don't have to drive to a real store at 2 in the morning, a cooler along the back wall that hummed in a way I stopped hearing after the first week and then started hearing again the way you do. 4 pumps out front under a metal canopy, and the canopy lights buzzed, all of them. A flat electric buzz that I genuinely think rewired something in my head over those 2 years. The floor was that speckled tile that's the color of nothing, so it never looks dirty and never looks clean. When it rained, the whole place smelled like wet floor and old coffee. I can call that smell up right now, sitting here. It's the easiest thing in the world for me to call up. My shift was 9 at night to 5 in the morning. The first hour or 2, there'd be real people. Guys coming off second shift at the plants, a few truckers, somebody's teenager buying an energy drink and not making eye contact. Then around midnight it would empty out, and it would be me and the buzzing and the cooler and the road. The road was the main thing. You'd see headlights way down 52, 2 little points, and you'd watch them grow for what felt like a full minute before the car actually went by, because there was nothing else to watch. I got good at guessing cars by their lights. That's the kind of skill the job gave you. I'm telling you all this because I want the shape of it to be in your head. The smallness, how quiet, how I had so much nothing to do that I noticed everything, every little thing, and that's not a special talent. That's just what happens to a person who stands in one lit room for 8 hours a night with the dark pressed up against the glass. You start keeping inventory of the room, without meaning to. And later, when something in the inventory was off, I knew. Not because I was sharp, just because there was nothing else in my head to compete with it. The first time it was October, and it was the worst storm we'd had since I started. I remember being almost glad about it at the start of the night, because weather at least was something. It came in fast off the river the way it does down there, the temperature dropping and the light going green-gray in that last hour of dusk, and by 10 o'clock it was full dark and the rain was coming down so hard the canopy lights looked like they were underwater. The thunder was right on top of us, not rolling, cracking, close, the kind you feel in the metal of the building. I had the radio on, the Huntington station, and the static was bad. It kept swallowing the host mid-word. I didn't think anything of that. Storm, old radio. You don't think anything of it. I had not had a customer in over an hour. And then the receipt printer went off. I should explain the printer because the printer matters more than anything else in this whole thing. It was the printer at the register, an old thermal one, and it printed customer receipts. That's all it did. It only ran when a sale rang up, when the register told it to. It did not run on its own. In all my time there, it had never once run on its own. It would jam, it would run low on paper and print those faint gray ghost receipts, normal printer problems, but it did not start itself. That night, it started itself. I was sitting on the stool behind the counter with the real estate magazine, and the printer just woke up. That mechanical zip sound they make. And it fed out a length of paper and cut it, and the paper dropped on the floor behind the counter. And I sat there. I genuinely sat there for a second with the magazine still in my hands, because my brain wanted very badly for that to have been something else. The cooler compressor or the ice machine, some other machine making some other sound. But I'd heard that printer 10,000 times. I knew what it was. I picked the receipt up off the floor. It was blank. Not totally blank, it had the header, the store name and the address and the phone number, the part that prints on every receipt. But where the items and the total should be, there was nothing. Just the header, and then white paper, and then the cut. And I want to tell you exactly what I thought, because this is the part that I've gone over the most. I thought, the power's doing something. The storms in the lines and the register glitched and spat a receipt. That's what I thought, and I was relieved to think it, and I balled the receipt up and tossed it in the trash under the counter and went back to the magazine. I had a guess. The guess made the world normal, and I took the guess. That's all I did. I think most people would have done the same. I'd ask you to remember that I did that later, because I did it a lot, and at some point doing it stopped being innocent. About 20 minutes after the receipt, the truck was at pump 3. I didn't see it pull in. That's the first thing. I want to be careful here because memory does what it wants, and I've had this memory a long time and I've handled it a lot, the way you handle a coin until the face wears off it. But I'm fairly sure I'm as sure as I can be that I did not see headlights come off the road and turn in. And I would have. I watched that road. Watching that road was 90% of the job. A vehicle pulling into the lot was an event. It was the most interesting thing that could happen. But I looked up from the magazine, the way you look up no reason, and there was a truck at pump 3. It was an old pickup. A square-bodied thing from the 70s or early 80s, the kind with the long bed, and it was red, or it had been red, the way a barn is red until it spends 40 years not being painted. Mostly it was rust and primer and that flat sun-killed pink that red goes. The bed had stuff in it, a tarp or something humped up under a tarp, I couldn't tell. It was just sitting at pump 3, parked square and proper like somebody had pulled in to get gas. Its lights were off, headlights, parking lights, all of it. In that storm, in that dark, with the rain coming sideways through the canopy lights, it sat there with no lights on at all. And I waited for the driver to make a run for the door. That's the normal thing. It's pouring. You've parked at the pump. You wait for a gap and you run in hunched over with your collar up. I had the thought, clear as anything. I'll get the mop. Somebody's about to track the whole lot in here. I actually started to stand up to get the mop. Nobody came. I looked at the truck and I tried to see the driver, and here's the part I don't like saying because it sounds like I'm building something, but I'm not. I'm just telling you. The windshield was wet and the canopy lights were on it, and behind that there was somebody, the shape of somebody, sitting where the driver sits. I could see that there was a darker mass in the dark of the cab, in the right place, the right size. But that's all it ever was. A shape that could have been a person, the way a coat over a chair can be a person for a second when you walk into your own bedroom. I never saw a face. I never saw a hand. I never saw it move. I'm not going to pretend I stood there terrified. I want to be honest about that. I stood there confused and a little annoyed, because confused at 2 a.m. mostly comes out as annoyed. I thought maybe somebody'd had car trouble, coasted in, was sitting it out. I thought about going out there and tapping the window, and then I thought about the rain and the lightning and going out there alone, and I decided the considerate thing was to leave the man be. That's how I put it to myself. Leave the man be. I sat back down. I watched the truck off and on for a while, between crossword clues. The pump didn't activate pump 3's little screen stayed dark. No gallons, no dollars. The nozzle never came off the hook. So it wasn't even getting gas. It was just there. And then, at some point, it wasn't. I didn't see it leave either. I looked up and pump 3 was empty, and the rain was still coming down on the wet black square of asphalt where it had been. No truck. And I felt that specific small relief you feel when a weird thing resolves itself without you having to do anything. And I finished the crossword, and around 3 the storm wore itself out. And at 5 Denny's morning girl came in shaking off her umbrella, and I drove home in that gray river light and slept. I did not think about it the next day. I want to be clear about that, because it matters for everything that comes after. I did not lie awake. I did not tell my mom. A blank receipt and a parked truck, there's nothing there. You can't even make it into a story. I'd have felt stupid saying it out loud, so I didn't say it out loud, and I let the whole night slide off me, and that looking back, that was the first thing it taught me. Not the truck, me. It taught me that I would let it slide. It had a lot of patience. I'll give it that. It was never in a hurry with me. It rained plenty that fall, and most of those nights nothing happened, and I want to keep saying that because it's the truth, and because it's the trick of the thing. Rain by itself did nothing. Drizzle, steady gray, all-night rain, the kind that just makes the road shine. Nothing. I worked through dozens of those. I'd think about the truck for a second when the rain started, the way you think about a bad dream when you see the bed you had it in, and then I'd forget it again. There was no truck. There was just a guy doing a crossword. It needed the storms, the real ones. And I didn't know that yet, that fall, so I couldn't have told you why some wet nights sat funny on me and some didn't. I just knew that sometimes the rain came in a particular way, fast and green and mean off the river with the thunder stacked up behind it. And on those nights there was a thing in me, low down, that I didn't have a name for. Not fear. More like the feeling of having left the stove on, a small wrongness you carry around the edge of. The second time was in November, maybe 3 weeks after the first, and the reason I can tell you it was the second time and not the 5th or the 10th is the printer. Because the printer is what I'd started, without deciding to, without admitting it, keeping an eye on. I hadn't told anybody about October. Who would I tell? But I'd noticed that on the wet nights, the bad wet nights, I'd find myself glancing at the printer. The way you glance at a dog that bit you once, just checking it was being a printer. And Denny would never have known to look at me and see that, and the morning girl wouldn't, but I knew, and I'd catch myself doing it and feel a little stupid and stop, and then do it again 20 minutes later. So the second storm, November. It came in hard right after midnight and the lot was empty and the canopy lights were doing their drowned thing, and I was behind the counter and I looked at the printer, and while I was looking at it, it went off. I want to be precise because precise is the only thing I have. I was looking right at it. I watched it wake up. I watched the paper feed and heard the cutter and watched the receipt curl down onto the floor. And I had been looking at it for, I'd say 4 or 5 seconds before it happened. Which means for 4 or 5 seconds I had been standing behind a counter in an empty store staring at a printer for no reason I could have told you. I picked up the receipt. Header, blank, cut. Same as October. Store name, the address, the phone number with the old exchange, and then nothing, and then the clean edge. And I stood there with it in my hand, and I did the thing again, the relief thing. I reached for the powers acting up explanation, and it didn't fit as well this time, and I knew it didn't, and I took it anyway. But there was a new thought underneath it that I couldn't get all the way rid of, and the new thought was just, okay, now wait. I put the receipt on the counter instead of in the trash. I didn't ball it up. I set it down flat by the register and I smoothed it with my hand, and I looked out at pump 3, and I waited. It took about 20 minutes. Same as before, near enough. And then I looked up, and I'll be honest, I'd been looking up every 15 seconds, so looked up isn't really right. It's more that one of the times I looked there it was, and the truck was at pump 3. Same truck. I don't mean a similar truck. The same one. That long bed pickup. The red that was barely red. The rust through the lower panels. The humped tarp in the bed. No lights. Parked square at pump 3 like it had every right to be there. And the windshield with the rain on it, and the canopy lights sliding around on the wet glass, and behind the glass, in the seat, the shape. The dark mass the size and the shape of a person sitting where a person sits. Not moving, never moving. The printer first, then the truck. I stood there and I let myself, for the first time, actually have the thought all the way through, instead of cutting it off halfway like I'd been doing. The thought was that the printer had told me. 20 minutes early, the printer had told me the truck was coming. And the second time it had told me while I was standing there watching it, like it didn't mind me knowing. I'd love to tell you I did something. Called Denny, called somebody, walked out there in the rain and put my hand on that truck to see if it was warm or cold or real. I didn't. I locked the front door, which I was technically not supposed to do, and I sat back down on the stool, and I watched the truck until it wasn't there. And then I unlocked the door, and at 5 I went home. The receipt I folded in half and put in my jacket pocket. I don't totally know why. I think I wanted proof, but proof for who? I never showed it to anybody. It went through the wash eventually, and that was that. Here's a thing I've thought about a lot. After that November night, I was not really afraid of the truck anymore. And I know how that sounds, like bravado. But it's the opposite of bravado, it's the saddest part. The truck never did anything. It didn't rev, it didn't roll toward the building. The shape in it never turned a face toward me. 2 visits in and the truck was already, in my head, filed under weather. A thing that happened, like the canopy lights buzzing, like the cooler. What had started to scare me, and it was a small scare still. A seed of one was the printer. Because the printer was inside with me. The printer was on my counter, 18 inches from my hand, and the printer knew first. The truck was out there. The thing that knew was in here. I kept the job, obviously. I want to say something about that because I think people hearing this will wonder why, and the answer is so boring it's almost the whole point. I kept the job because it was a job, and I needed one and I didn't have another, because winter was coming and my car needed tires. Because what would I even have said? Denny, I quit. The printer's haunted. He'd have laughed, and he'd have been right to. Because the truck never hurt anybody, and the printer never hurt anybody, and a blank receipt is not a reason to throw away a paycheck. Every single reason I had for staying was a good, sane, normal reason. That's what I'd want you to sit with, if you sit with anything. There was never a night where staying was the crazy choice. It was always, every time, the reasonable one. That's how it had me. It never once asked me to be brave or stupid. It just asked me to be reasonable, over and over, and I was. Winter was quiet. We got snow, we got the gray-nothing weather, and storms with real thunder are rare down there in the cold months. So for a long stretch there was just the job. I did crosswords. I learned that the Huntington radio host's name was Mike, and that he had a daughter at Marshall and a bad hip. I restocked the oil. The cooler hummed. I had whole weeks where the October and November nights felt like something I'd half-dreamed. And that's not me being dramatic. That's just what time does to a thing if the thing lets it. And the thing let it. It was patient like that. It would go quiet for 6 weeks and let me almost smooth back over. And I think now that the smoothing over was part of it too, that it wanted me soft again so the next one would land. But here's what I noticed that winter, and it's such a small thing, and it's the one that I think actually changed me, more than the printer, more than the truck. Sometime around February, I caught myself looking at the window before the thunder. It was a slow night, sleet more than rain, nothing storm about it. I was behind the counter, and I looked up at the front windows, out at the lot and the road, just looked up, and about 2 seconds later thunder went off, faint, far down the river. Winter thunder, the once-a-season kind. And I'd looked up before it. I'd looked up at the window like somebody'd said my name. And I sat there with that. Because there was no printer that night. There was no truck. There was no storm to speak of. There was just me behind a counter, looking at a window 2 seconds ahead of a sound, and I could not explain to myself why I had done it. And the explanations I reached for, I heard it coming. Low frequency, the building shifted. They were fine. They were probably even true, except that I had not noticed myself hearing anything. My body had heard it. My body had turned my head. And my body had not asked me first. I want to be careful not to make that sound bigger than it was. I didn't go home shaking. I didn't tell anybody. It was a man glancing at a window, but I'd added it to the inventory, the way I added everything to the inventory, and the inventory was starting slowly to have a shape, and the shape was not the truck, and it was not the printer. The shape was that things on the inside of that station, things including me, were starting to move a little early, a beat early, like the whole place had heard something coming and the rest of us were just the echo of it hearing. The third storm was in March, and it was the one where I stopped being able to call any of it a coincidence, and I knew it that night, standing there. I felt the floor of the explanations go out from under me. It came in on a Thursday, a real one, the first big storm of the spring. I'd worked maybe 45 minutes of customers and then the lot emptied the way it does, and the rain started for real around 11. And I'd gotten, I have to be honest about this, I'd gotten almost ready. Without a printer telling me anything, without anything yet, the bad wet feeling was in me from the second the sky went green at dusk, and I'd done a couple of things. I'd put a fresh roll of paper in the printer even though the old one was maybe a third full. I'd wipe down the counter. Little things. Tidying. The way you tidy a room before somebody comes over. I didn't think of it like that at the time. At the time, I'd have told you I was just bored and keeping busy. It's only later, lining the nights up, that I can see I was setting the table. So the rain's going, and I go to do something at the card reader on pump 3. Each pump had a little card reader and screen out at the island, and they were old and they were always half broken. And you'd reset them from inside, or sometimes you'd have to go out and physically do it. Pump 3's had been glitchy for weeks, and that night, around 11, with the storm just getting its feet under it, I looked at the monitor behind the counter that showed all 4 pumps, and pump 3's was scrambled. Not off. Scrambled, the little screen out there cycling, the display flickering through itself, garbage characters, then black, then the welcome screen, then garbage again. Pumps 1, 2, and 4 sat there normal. 3 was seizing. I'd seen it glitch before. I want to be fair. It was a bad reader. But I stood there and I watched it cycle, and I noticed the rain wasn't even hard yet, and I noticed that the printer had not gone off. And I had the clearest, coldest thought I'd had in that whole building up to that point. I thought, it's not the printer that knows. It's the whole thing. The printer's just the loudest part of it. The pump knows too. The pump's getting ready in its own way. And while I was standing there having that thought, the printer went off. I didn't jump. That's the part I'd want a stranger to understand. By March, the printer going off in an empty store at night did not make me jump. I just looked over at it, the way you look over at a clock that's chimed. It fed the paper, it cut, the receipt dropped. Header, blank, edge. I left it on the floor, and I looked back out at pump 3, and the reader had stopped scrambling. It had settled, gone quiet, back to the welcome screen, and I understood, without being able to say how, that it had settled because it was done. It had finished whatever getting ready was. And about 20 minutes later the truck was at pump 3, no lights, the tarp humped in the bed, the shape sitting in the seat, the rain sliding the canopy light around on the glass. And it stayed a while, and then it was gone. So that's 3. And after 3 I couldn't do the thing anymore, the relief thing, the powers in the lines thing. Not because I'd decided to be brave. I just couldn't get the explanation to cover it all at once. It was like a blanket that was too small. Pull it over the printer and the pump's uncovered. Pull it over the pump and there's my own head, looking at windows ahead of thunder. I'd lie in bed in the morning light and try to lay the blanket out flat over the whole thing, and a corner would always be sticking out. And after a while I'd just stop trying, and that's its own kind of quiet. When you stop trying to explain something, you've also stopped expecting it to stop. I want to tell you about the tire tracks, and then I want to tell you about the woman, because those two happened close together that spring, and they're the ones that took it out of the realm of the truck altogether. Sometime in April I'd gotten into the habit, and habit's the right word. It had snuck up on me as a habit of walking out to pump 3. On the slow nights, not even storm nights necessarily, I'd come around the counter and go out through the doors and walk the lot, telling myself I was checking the trash cans or seeing if the air machine was still busted, and my walk would take me past pump 3, and I'd look at the ground there, the asphalt, where the truck parked. I don't know what I expected to find. I think I just wanted to stand on the spot in the daylight hours of the night, the unhaunted hours, and have it be ordinary asphalt and reassure myself. One night in April it wasn't. It hadn't rained yet. I want to be very clear about the order of this because the order is the whole thing. It hadn't rained. It was going to, you could feel it. The green was in the dusk. The bad wet feeling was sitting in me. I'd already put the fresh roll in the printer without quite letting myself notice I'd done it. But the storm hadn't come. The lot was dry. I'd walked the whole lot, and the whole lot was dry, gray and dry under the canopy lights. And there were 2 tire tracks leading into pump 3. Dark, wet. 2 wet tire width lines coming in off the apron and stopping right at pump 3, right where it parked, side by side, the spacing of a truck. Wet, on dry pavement, under a dry sky, like something had driven in through rain that hadn't started yet and parked, and I stood over those tracks for a long time. I crouched down. I touched one. It was water. Just water. Cool, a little gritty. The tracks led in and they did not lead back out. They came in to pump 3 and they stopped, and there was no truck, and the sky was dry, and 20 minutes later the rain started, and an hour after that the printer went off, and an hour after that the truck was at pump 3 sitting square in its own wet tracks, like it was settling into a chair that had been pulled out for it. I went home that morning, and I didn't sleep. That was the first night the job actually cost me sleep. I lay there in the daylight with my arm over my eyes, and I kept coming back to the same place, the same little snag, and it wasn't the truck, and it wasn't even the printer. It was that the lot had been wet before the rain. The station had been wet before the rain. The building had, I don't have a better way to say this, and I've tried. The building had been remembering the storm before the storm got there, setting out the tracks like setting out plates. And I was inside that building 8 hours a night. The woman came maybe 2 weeks after the tracks. It was a storm night, a bad one, and she was a real person, and I need her in this because she's the only other person who was ever in that building when it happened, and I think about what she did or what she didn't do more than almost anything. She came in around 1 in the morning with the rain just hammering. An older woman, 60s maybe, in a windbreaker that hadn't done her any good. Her car had a flat or a belt or something gone. She'd pulled in to wait it out and use the phone, and there wasn't anybody she could reach at that hour, so she just waited in the store with me, and I was glad of her. I want you to know that. I'd had 1.5 years of those nights alone, and a real person standing by the coffee burners complaining about her son-in-law was the warmest thing that had happened to me in weeks. I made her a coffee on the house. We talked. Mike was on the radio. And while she was standing there, the printer went off. I watched her. I want to be honest that I watched her instead of the printer. The printer fed its blank receipt onto the floor, and I didn't even look at it. I looked at her face, because here finally was a test. Here was another set of eyes, and I needed to know. She glanced at it. That's all. She heard the sound, and her eyes went to the register for a second the way anybody's would. And then they came back to me, and she kept talking about her son-in-law. It had not landed on her at all. It was a printer making a printer noise. Why would it land on her? She hadn't spent 1.5 years learning that sound the way I'd learned it. To her, it was nothing, because to anybody sane, it was nothing. And 20 minutes later, I said something I don't remember what, something to move her toward the window, and the truck was at pump 3. And I said, careful, not wanting to put anything in her head, I said something like, looks like somebody else is waiting it out. And she looked. She actually looked, out at pump 3, right at it, the red truck with no lights and the shape in the cab. And she said it, and I have never forgotten this. Word for word, I've never forgotten it. She said, better him than me. And she turned back around and warmed her hands on the coffee. She saw it. I've held on to that for 11 years like it's worth money. She saw the truck. It was there. It was real enough to be seen. I hadn't grown it in my own head out of crosswords and buzzing lights. But she saw a truck. She saw a man waiting out a storm. She did not see no headlights. She did not see that nobody ran for the door. She did not see that the printer had called it 20 minutes early, because she didn't have the inventory. She'd been in that building 40 minutes. I'd been in it 18 months. The horror was never in the truck, you understand? You could put the truck in front of anybody. The horror was in the 18 months. The horror was the part of it that was only ever going to be visible to the one person who'd been standing in that room long enough to be taught. Her son came around too, and the rain had eased, and she left, and she thanked me for the coffee, and she drove off into the gray, and she has no idea, wherever she is, that she's in a story. She probably remembers a kind young man at a gas station. I hope she does. I'd like to be that somewhere in somebody's memory of that night. A kind young man and nothing else. After the woman, I gave up the last of it. The last of the pretending. And what came in to take its place wasn't fear. I've tried that word 100 times over the years, and it has never once fit. It was closer to employment. Like a second job had been folded inside the first one, a set of duties nobody had written down and nobody was paying me for. And I'd stopped arguing about whether the duties were mine and just started doing them well even. That's the part I still can't get comfortable with. I did them well, because by that summer I had a whole routine for the storms, and there was not one piece of it I could point at and say, there, that's the night I decided to start. I'd see the green come up in the dusk and my hands would already be moving. Fresh roll in the printer, counter wiped down. Coffee burners topped off with nobody coming for coffee, though I'll keep the coffee. A man's allowed one thing in a routine that's just his, and the coffee was mine. Mop stood up against the counter, and then the radio, which is the piece I still can't lay flat in my head, because the radio is where it quit being me keeping busy and turned into the station handing me a tool. The Huntington signal came in clean most nights and went staticky in weather, which is nothing. Every radio in the world does that. But before the truck, every single time once I knew to listen for it, the static did a thing that was the opposite of weather. It cleared. The signal would smooth right out, and Mike's voice would come up close and warm, closer than any storm should have let it, and hold there a minute, and then it would drop, not into static, into nothing. Flat, dead air, no hiss even. The whole band gone like somebody'd pulled the plug, 20 or 30 seconds of that, and then mic back mid-word like he'd never been gone. And the dead gap was the printer's cue. The gap, then the printer. Always that order. So now I had a warning. A 1-minute warning and then a 30-second one, regular as a train schedule. And I need you to catch what I did with it, because it's the quietest bad thing in this whole story. I used it. I didn't unplug the radio. I didn't put it in the dumpster. I heard the signal go clean and I set down my magazine and I walked to my spot and stood there, settled, composed, so the printer couldn't make me jump. I'd been handed a warning system and I had accepted it, and accepting it is what finished the job of making me staff. A witness is allowed to be afraid. Staff just gets ready. Somewhere in that summer I'd crossed from the one to the other and nobody had announced it, and I hadn't felt it happen, because it happened the way all of it happened, one reasonable little step, and then you're standing somewhere you'd never have walked to on purpose. And then the station started reaching past itself. Everything it had done up to that summer, it had done indoors. The printer, the pump reader, the scrambled screen, all of it inside the box of the store, in here, with me. The door was the first time it went outward, out past its own walls, and that's why the door is the one that finally got under my skin. The front door was an old automatic slider on a motor, tripped off a sensor, and on the storm nights it started opening before the truck. Just opening. The motor grinding, the slider rolling back, the warm, wet air pushing in across the mat, and nobody on the mat. Nobody in the lot. The door standing wide into the rain for a few seconds and then drawing itself shut again. And then, after, always after, the truck. The door, then the truck. The building opening up ahead of the truck the exact way a man holds a door for somebody he's been expecting. And that was the word that fixed itself to me on the drive home and has never worked loose since. Expecting. Not bracing for it. Not warning me about it. Expecting it, the way you expect a guest. The station had started treating that truck like company. It had never once treated me like anything but the help. I have to tell you about one more night before the last one, because it's the night the thing stopped being something that happened in the room and started being something that happened in me. And if I skip it, then the last night won't make the kind of sense it needs to. It was August. Bad storm. A long one. The kind that sits over the river and doesn't move. And by August, my routine was so worn in that I genuinely could not have told you where the edges of it were. I'd hear the signal go clean on the radio, and I'd be at my spot before I'd thought the thought. It had gotten that smooth. And smooth is the dangerous part. I know that now. When a thing you do gets smooth enough, you stop being able to feel yourself doing it. And once you can't feel yourself doing it, you can't choose to stop, because stopping requires you to first notice you'd started. So that night the dead air gap came and the printer went off and I was at the counter for it. And the door did its thing, opened on the empty mat and held and closed. And then the truck was at pump 3, regular night, regular as any of it ever got. And then I was standing at the door. I need to be careful and slow here. I was standing at the front door on the inside of it, close enough that the sensor had caught me and the door was open, standing open into the rain, and the warm, wet storm air was coming in around me, and pump 3 was maybe 40 feet away across the wet lot, and the truck was sitting on it, and I was looking right at the shape in the cab, and I had no memory of crossing the store. None. I'd been behind the counter. I want to say that flat so you don't think I'm leaving a gap to be dramatic. I have no gap to fill. That's the whole horror of it. I had been behind the counter, and then with nothing in between, no walking, no deciding, no moment of here I go. I was at the open door with one foot already out past the threshold onto the mat, in the rain, water coming down the back of my collar, my body turned and pointed and halfway out into the night, toward pump 3. My second job had a part of it I'd never been shown. That's what it felt like. Like I'd been doing the printer and the mop and the radio for 2 years, and those were just the training, and now the building had decided I was ready for the rest of the duties, and the rest of the duties were out there. were 40 feet away, and my legs had simply started the walk because it was time and the schedule said so, and the schedule had stopped consulting me a long while back. I caught it. I want to be clear that I caught it, that I'm here telling you this. So obviously I caught it. Something in me snagged. I think it was the rain down my collar. I think it was that one cold, ordinary, stupid sensation that didn't belong to the routine. And I came back into myself all at once, hard, the way you jolt awake when you've nodded off standing up. And I was terrified, finally, fully 2 years in, and I was finally as afraid as the situation had deserved the whole time, except I want you to notice I was not afraid of the truck. I was 40 feet from the truck, and the truck was the last thing on my mind. I was afraid of my own legs. I was afraid of the quiet, competent thing inside me that had walked me across that store on schedule and would have kept walking me out across the lot through the rain to the side of that truck. To do? I don't know. I will never know. I have spent 11 years being grateful that I don't know. I backed up. I got myself behind the counter and I put my hands flat on it and I stood there with my heart going and the door finally closing itself and the rain on the glass, and I watched pump 3 until the truck was gone, and I did not move from that spot, not an inch, until the morning girl's headlights came down 52 at 5 o'clock. I held myself in place by main strength for 2 hours, because I no longer trusted the thing that moved me. That's the night I should have quit. I know that. Anybody hearing this knows that. And I didn't, and I've made my peace with why I didn't. And the why is the same boring why it always was. It was a job, I needed it. What would I have said? But there's a harder piece under that one, and since I've come this far, I'll set it down too. I didn't quit because some part of me, some trained, obedient part that the station had built up over 2 years like a callus, did not want to. Did not want to miss the next storm. Had started, God help me, to look forward to the clean signal and the dead air gap the way you look forward to anything you're good at. The station hadn't just scared me, it had given me something to be 8 hours a night, and a person will hold on to that. A person will hold on to that even when it's walking him toward the rain. The last real night was in September, almost exactly 2 years from when I'd started, and it was the night I decided to find out which of us was doing it, me or the building. Because that was the question I couldn't put down by then. I'd been running my routine so long, the printer roll, the mop, the counter, standing at my spot for the dead air gap, that I genuinely no longer knew if the station was anticipating the truck or if I was. And the truck was just coming to the appointment that I, by getting ready, kept making. It sounds insane laid out like that. It felt insane. But I'd done a thing every storm for the better part of a year, and I wanted one time to not do it and see. So that night the storm came in, and I sat on the stool and I did nothing. I want to tell you it was easy to do nothing, and it was the hardest shift I ever worked. The green came in the dusk, and everything in me wanted to put the fresh roll in the printer, and I gripped the edge of the stool, and I didn't. I didn't wipe the counter. I didn't get the mop. I left the radio off. I'd thought of that. I turned the radio all the way off so it couldn't tell me anything, so there'd be no clean signal and no dead gap, so I would be flying blind the way a normal person flies through a normal storm. I sat on my hands, almost literally. And then actually, because partway through the storm, I caught my right hand up at the counter working on its own, dragging a slow, clean arc through the condensation on the glass, polishing it the way I'd polished that counter on 100 other storm nights. And I had not told it to do that. I took it back. I put it in my lap and held it there, and I watched the rain come down, and I waited to find out if any of it needed me. It did not need me. The printer went off at the regular time. With the radio dead silent in the corner, with me having touched nothing, the printer woke up on its own and fed a blank receipt onto the floor, and I hadn't loaded the fresh roll, so it printed on the old one, faint, but it printed. The header and the blank and the cut. And a few minutes after that, the door opened. The motor and the slider in the wet air, nobody on the mat. The door standing open and patient into the storm and then closing. and the monitor showed pump 3 scrambling and settling. The whole routine ran. Every part of it ran without me, in order, on time. And I sat on that stool and watched my second job get done by the building while I did nothing at all. And that was when I finally understood the thing, the actual thing, the thing I'd been walking toward for 2 years. It had never needed me. It was always going to do all of it. The printer, the door, the pump, the truck that was the stations. That was happening with me or without me. That machinery did not care whether a person stood behind the counter. So my routine, my careful little routine, the roll and the mop and the standing at my spot, that had never been me helping. It had never been me participating in keeping anyone safe or anything running. It had only ever been me being trained. The building hadn't needed an assistant. It had just had one, the way a current has a thing it carries, and the carrying had felt like swimming. And I'd been so proud, in some small, sick corner, of how good I'd gotten at my strokes. And the truck came. Of course the truck came. It pulled, it appeared, settled. I still don't have the verb at pump 3. The red gone to pink, no lights, the tarp in the bed, and the shape in the cab where the driver sits, and the rain moving the canopy light around on the glass. And I sat there and I looked at it, and for the first time in 2 years I cried. A little, not loud, and not even about the truck. The truck I was used to. I cried because I'd just been shown, plain, that the worst thing in that building had never been parked outside it. The worst thing was the 18 months, then the 2 years. The worst thing was what those rooms had quietly done to the inside of a tired man who'd only ever needed the paycheck. I didn't quit. I want to be honest all the way to the end of this and not give myself a clean exit I didn't earn. I didn't square my shoulders and walk out. What happened is smaller and worse. Denny's health had been going, and the station had been losing money for years the way I told you, and that October he made a decision that had nothing to do with me and nothing to do with trucks. He cut the overnight. It didn't pay. Nobody bought gas on 52 at 3 in the morning anymore. He shook my hand and he was kind about it, and he gave me 2 weeks and a little extra in the last envelope. And my last shift was a Tuesday with no weather in it at all. A clear, cool, dry night, not a cloud in it. I spent most of that last shift doing the ordinary nothing. My feet sore in my work shoes the same flat way they were sore at the end of every shift I ever worked there, rubbing my eyes at the counter, letting a coffee go cold at my elbow the way I always let it. And I locked the door at 5 for the last time and handed the keys to the morning girl and drove home in the gray. The job didn't release me with any kind of ceremony. It just ended. The way the rest of it had always worked, quiet and reasonable and nobody's fault. The building's gone now. I'll tell you that much because people always want to know. They widened that stretch of 52 a few years back, and the station wasn't worth keeping, and they took it down, the canopy and the pumps and all of it. And last I drove through there, it was just a flat place by the road with gravel on it. There's nothing to go see. I think people want there to be a thing you can go stand in front of, and there isn't. That's almost the point of why I'm telling it. The thing didn't stay with the building. The building was just where I caught it. Because here's where I actually am, 11 years on, and it's not dramatic, and I think that's why it's taken me this long to be able to say it. I have a good life. I want that on the record. I've got the wife I mentioned, and a house and a kid and a job that has nothing to do with any of this. Most days I don't think about Southern Ohio at all, but I have never once, in 11 years, been able to stand at the third pump at a gas station. I park so I get pump 1 or pump 2 or the far end, and if the only open spot is third, I'll wait. I'll sit and wait for another, and I've gotten smooth enough about it that nobody in the car ever notices. And the receipt printers, the little thermal ones, every store still has them. The bank has one. The parking garage has one. When one of those goes off near me, that zip and cut sound, something in my chest drops half an inch before I can stop it. 11 years. It still does it. I've stopped expecting it not to. And the storms. I told you at the start, and now you know the shape of it. so I'll just tell you the rest plain. When a real storm comes in at night, the kind with thunder stacked behind it, I wake up before the thunder. I've timed it and I've stopped timing it because the answer doesn't change. I come up out of sleep into the dark of my own bedroom with my heart going and the lights not even flickering yet. And I lie there, and my body is doing something, and it took me years to be willing to name what it's doing. It's getting ready. There's no printer to load. There's no mop. There's no counter. There's no dead air gap on a radio. There's no pump 3. There's no lot. The building is gravel by a road 300 miles from where I sleep. There is nothing anywhere in my life for me to get ready for. And I lie there in the dark anyway, and I feel the whole routine try to run in a body that has nowhere to run it. The way they say a man feels the hand he hasn't got. The station taught me a shape, and then the station went away and the shape didn't. The shape just stayed in me, running on nothing, every storm, waiting at a counter that hasn't existed in years for a truck that was never mine to begin with. My wife sleeps right through it. I'm glad she does. I lie there until the thunder comes and goes and the rain settles into the ordinary kind. And then, after a while, I sleep again. And in the morning, it's just a story, the way it always was, the way it was so good at being. Nothing happened. A man woke up in a storm. You can't even make it into a story. I just wanted to tell somebody who'd been standing there long enough to hear it.